Welcome to City Forum this week. We are really delighted to have Jay Crossley with us to speak with us about the case for Metropolitan Planning Organization reform. Key governance institutions for transportation at the regional scale. And he'll be talking to us about findings from work that he's done looking at transportation equity in Texas. So Jay has spent a fair amount of time in Austin, and he's recently come back here, relocated to Austin after spending about a decade in Houston. Prior to being in Houston, he lived in Austin for a good stretch and graduated from the LBJ school right here. His time in Houston is really interesting. He's done a lot of stuff. He spent the last decade working at Houston Tomorrow, which is an independent think tank devoted to improving the quality of life for the Houston region. While in Houston, he served on the mayor's traffic and transportation transition team, the City of Houston Bike Advocacy Committee, Advisory Committee, the Houston Galveston Area Council on Our Great Region 2040 Bylaws Subcommittee, and he also co-founded the Houston Access to Urban Sustainability Project, focused on affordable transit-oriented cooperative housing. So we're delighted to have this thoughtful speaker. He's spent a lot of time thinking about organizations and change at the regional scale, and I'm sure he'll have some interesting things to say.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for having me here. So I come from across the campus over there. And I'll have some disclaimers later about what I know and what you guys know. So these guys, this is the Waller County Judge and Commissioners from 1966, just after passage of the Civil Rights Act. This is a story we know about Texas. This is a story about our shameful past, about systemic racism, about white men in power. But back then, we all know this story. And of course, Waller County has made Texas famous again with the whole Sandra Bland case. So that's what Waller County, part of the Houston region. This is last week. The Houston Galveston Area Council, Transportation Policy Council, decided on their executive committee for the coming year. And it's these 5 men. And there's some details. These men are all from suburban or rural counties of the Houston region. This guy's the one city, the mayor of Pearland, which is basically a suburban city, but he's actually done some interesting urbanism things and trying to make Pearland a livable, walkable place. And this is Ed Emmett, another graduate of the LBJ School of Public Affairs, who is the Harris County judge, who represents 4 million people. However, he's somewhat outnumbered here. And you'll notice that the city of Houston, which is home to 2 million people, does not have a seat here. And Ed Emmett has made quite a point during his career that the city of Houston takes care of their people. His people are the 2 million people in the unincorporated Harris County. And so these kind of things go up and down the system of transportation decision-making in Texas. And so this was this summer, the development of the Unified Transportation Plan, which is the 10-year plan. And because TxDOT is filthy rich right now, this is a $70 billion plan, about $7 billion a year, was decided over the summer how that was going to be spent. And this is the people who decided it. The one person of color that was involved in the discussions is Ashby Johnson, the director of the CAMPO MPO here in Austin. This is our Texas Transportation Commission a couple years ago during Governor Rick Perry term. The Texas Transportation Commission is appointed by the governor with the advice and consent of the Senate. As far as I know, there's never been an argument over that. Over the history of the Texas Transportation Commission, there have been 3 women and I think 3 people of color. And that history starts in like 1912. However, we had a new governor. Governor Abbott came in and changed things up. There's now a woman. And these guys are the ones who decide how to spread $7 billion a year around the state. An interesting tidbit is these 2 are basically car dealers, although she works for Toyota of the Southwest, and he himself is a Dallas car dealer. He's a real estate guy. He is a banker for real estate, and then Tryon Lewis has been an elected official for a long time. I'm not sure what he did before that. So a couple disclaimers. I'm not presenting anything new. Our society has dealt with systemic racism and sexism throughout various systems. So I might be explaining some things you understand. Also, what I have done for the actual meat of this research is to look up people and try to decide if they're white, black, Hispanic, male, female. And I am necessarily going to have been wrong about some people, and it's necessarily a weird process. However, there are some interesting patterns you can find. Another key point is if we agree that there's a systemic racism, systemic sexism happening here, that does not mean that the individuals we're talking about are racist or sexist or terrible or bad. And this is about the system and what we could do to change the system. And it's also a little bit about sprawl. So I was going to switch over to start us off with a little video. That I thought was somewhat remarkable. I've never seen an MPO do something like this, so.
My name is Andrew Cannon. I serve as the Transportation Director for the Hidalgo County Metropolitan Planning Organization. I oversee the day-to-day activities of great staff. I take guidance from our elected officials that serve on our Transportation Policy Committee, and the Hidalgo County MPO is tasked with transportation planning on a 25-year horizon for highways, hike and bike trails, sidewalks, and transit. We welcome the public to our offices at any time to be more involved and more engaged on the transportation planning issues that have to do with all of the citizens of Hidalgo County.
Hello, my name is Linda de la Fuente and I am an Assistant Transportation Director at the Hidalgo County Metropolitan Planning Organization, mostly responsible for the financial operations and the fiscal constraint of the long and short-range funding of transportation projects.
Hello, I'm Luis Diaz, Transportation Planner 2 at the Hidalgo County MPO. I oversee the Geographic Information System GIS section of the MPO. Our major task at hand is data collection and development of our travel demand model used to plan for the future of transportation infrastructure.
My name is John Ray Boganegra, and I'm a transportation planner with the Hidalgo County MPO. You can contact me to learn more about transportation alternatives and performance measures.
My name is Miguel Arispe. I am a GIS specialist at the Hidalgo County MPO. I work on demographic data for our travel demand model, and I also help manage data on UMAP, our online interactive map.
Hello, my name is Fernando Cantu, and I'm a GIS specialist for the Hidalgo County MPO. I work on demographic data, and I oversee the collection of traffic counts.
I'm Berenice Gonzalez. I'm a planner with Hidalgo County MPO. I specialize in bicycle and pedestrian issues, so if you would like to know more about the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, you can get in contact with me.
Hello, I'm Braulio Garza, and I work as the Transportation Planner at the Hidalgo County MPO. I specialize on freight issues and transportation legislation.
Hello, my name is Gloria Banda Gonzalez. I am the Administrative Assistant for the Hidalgo County MPO. My duties consist of transcribing and posting minutes on the website for the policy and TAC meetings.
So I thought that was actually the best explanation I've ever seen of what MPOs do in 3 minutes. And so it's part of why I wanted to show it to you. I'm going to show you very briefly the beginning of this one, which is also really nice what they've done, is there's a Spanish version.
Mi nombre es Andrew Cannon y soy el director de transportación de la organización al público a cualquier hora para que se involucren.
Responsable de la operación financiera y la planeación.
The other point that's interesting is Hidalgo County is 91% Hispanic, and you will notice that all of the staff of the Hidalgo County MPO are Hispanic and speak Spanish, except for the person in charge. And I'm sure he is very good, but it's pretty interesting example. So a little survey before that video. How many of you knew about MPO, or before the intro, how many of you knew about MPOs, or that acronym? Okay. And then how many actually knew what MPOs did? Okay. How many of you guys are CRP students? Okay. So some basics about what I think MPOs do. One of the things MPOs do is lie with maps. So this is a map that's part of the Connections 2025. This is actually Capital Metro's map. And I, to some extent, didn't want to pick on this one because there happens to be the consultants doing the maps for the Connections 2025 process have done lots of really good maps, and they're not lying with maps. But this map is lying. And so, in general, in the world of MPOs, and the world of like business journals or people who talk about regions, you will see percent change. And you will see percent change over giant blobs compared to tiny blobs. And both of those things obscure information. And so this is presented to the Capital Metro Board as where the poor people are. And we need to be providing transit out long distances out to these places. But what this map really shows you is where there aren't poor people today, and they're kind of adding some. And in general, percent change, there's a joke about investment. If someone comes and invests and asks you to invest in their business and says, we're one of the fastest growing businesses in the region, what they're telling you is their business is very small. And so this is a good map, and this is actual density of people living in poverty, which is a very, very different map than this map. And if you're planning a transit system for this map, you're going to miss the people in poverty, or most of them. And this is just an example. It's actually from the election results in Harris County, and the Houston Chronicle data reporter was posting the election results and showing, kind of kept making a point about everybody's voting in this place out here in the middle of nowhere, or in the suburbs. And 219 people had voted in that shape, whereas in the same size shape, about 2,000 people had voted. And so if you download data from the census and use census blocks, which are different size shapes, and then you say, okay, how many people are doing X thing inside that shape? You've somewhat presented a meaningless map. And this is another kind of, you see this all the time. Growth in Texas is happening in Hays County. Hays County, Texas is the fastest growing county in Texas. We must spend all of our transportation money in Hays County because of this map. And it's a percent growth map. So the real data is that more people are being added to Harris County every year than the next two counties combined, and 10 times as many people as Hays County. And if you look in the Austin region, Travis County, more people are being added to Travis County every year than all the other counties in our region. However, this is what is talked about over and over and over again at the MPOs and in the reports. that this is what we need to spend our money on. So the good maps is a different thing. Perhaps the most important thing I will tell you is to look up the Center for Neighborhood Technologies Housing and Transportation Index, which has everything you need to know about everything. This is a map of actual affordability. At this point in American history, if anyone is talking about affordability and they are not using this map or a similar map, they are lying. I'm happy to say that at this point. They're either intentionally manipulating you or they don't know what they're talking about. And it is not proper to discuss affordability without combining housing and transportation. So for example, the city of Austin is doing an affordability plan. The original draft plan was all lies, which is unfortunate. But when you look at a real map of affordability, you will notice that the affordable places in the Austin region are in the core and in the near core. And that all the stories about people moving out to Manor because they can't afford it, they are not in an affordable situation. And they are spending so much money on transportation that they are not doing well. And so this has huge impact on actual affordable housing dollars, because every amount of affordable housing dollar you put in an unaffordable location is really a mean trick. Another thing is vehicle miles traveled. This is perhaps the most important environmental issue for the Austin region, for most metro regions, is vehicle miles traveled. Along with sort of code next, how much concrete you have to cover the ground with. But even in Texas, there are places where people can live car-free or car-light lives. And to whatever extent over the next 30 years we can build more of such places, we can save the world. This is, in terms of anything you can do with your life, most likely, this is the question. This is climate change. And that it varies tremendously across our region and every region. And so this is greenhouse gas emissions per person, basically, or per household. And there is a very small place that is low carbon lifestyle. And the whole point, if we want the world to survive, is to have more of those places. And so this will be, I guess this is the appropriate place to say, you must be involved in the Code Next debates. It does look very terrible. It looks like the anti-environmentalist segregationists have been very powerful. And they're planning to make the situation much worse over the next 30 years. So those are good maps. So then just a little bit of how we played with the maps in Houston. This is the VMT per household map for Houston. CO2 per acre. There is actually a much larger place in Houston where you can live a low carbon lifestyle than in Austin. And then the same concept of affordability applies in Houston. There are no affordable houses outside of Beltway 8 in Houston, which is very different than the story you hear. And so we did this thing with the C&T data, and mostly my point is you can do this. And the power of GIS is not pretty maps, although you want to always make sure people aren't lying. The power of GIS is really organizing data. And so we isolated everything between rural, suburban, urban, and super urban in the Houston region just based on density, and basically proved all the things that urbanists say. So the super urban, the most dense places, drive the least, drive 10,000 miles less than the rural people of the region. And rural really includes exurbs in Houston. They emit half as much CO2 per person. And it's also the most affordable part of the Houston region. And so, yeah. Yeah, this is transportation CO2. So, although there's various studies that having the greenest house in the middle of sprawl and driving a battery-powered car, you still emit a lot more than living in the dirtiest building in town. And so the point here is we did this, and I guess the only point to make is that the super urbans really are spread across the Houston region. And so these orange ones are super urban, and the purple ones are urban, and the yellow ones are suburban. And so one of the problems at Austin, there's a debate between the core and everything else, and that is the wrong way to look at it. There are sprawl parts of Austin's core, and there are people fighting to keep it that way. And there are the north of 183 is becoming one of the most dense parts of our region. And so we should not talk about a center versus everything else. We should talk about the urban places and the non-urban places. And the urban places should be spread out. And ideally, you connect a region of urban places with great transit. And so that gets it. Final good map is this was back to Connections 2025 consultants. This is an awesome map. You can't see it, but this is sort of people per acre and jobs, and then the sort of darkened things are transit supportive. And so this is the kind of thing you need. Our MPO decision makers make extremely important decisions with bad maps. Whereas if you have a good map, you can say, clearly, we should connect that with transit somehow. Clearly, you then maybe do that and connect that and keep going. And any kind of discussion of transportation infrastructure should start here and serve the most people. But we do not do that. This is too weird, but the size of these bubbles are the number of people who walk or take transit to work. So this is the nation's people living low-carbon lifestyles, and the entirety of them, basically. And the things in green are all cities that were suggested on a recent TTI study for the Austin region to compare itself to when thinking about transit. And so the interesting point is that they missed all of the places that have a lot of transit and that a lot of people effectively use transit. And so this is the way we should be. We really need to be looking at things, comparing ourselves to different places. Personally, my theory is that Austin's transit vision is we should try to equal Baltimore in 10 years, and we should try to equal Seattle or Philadelphia in 20. That's a very different story than should we be trying to figure out what Atlanta is doing right. So massive spending, and the key here is just there's massive spending. And this is something I did a little while back of the 10 largest MPOs in the nation. Houston is spending the most per capita on roads. So, and this is before Prop 1 and Prop 7. And this is the text.utp, which there's the key number. $70 billion is 29 million speed humps, 70,000 miles of protected bike lanes, 379,000 miles of sidewalk, or 7,000 miles of road. We are spending crazy amounts of money. So any discussions where people tell you, we can't afford to have a sidewalk that's accessible, they are lying. And they don't understand how much money is happening. And it's particularly Prop 7 is coming. And TxDOT will spend somewhere between $3 and $5 billion in the Austin region over the next 8 years. So when we voted on a $700 million bond, that was great. That will be swamped by TxDOT spending. And then MPOs are very susceptible to public input. The example is over the summer, somebody, probably a contractor, organized a bunch of people to write letters about one intersection of 620 and something. It was a sprawl road, and got 80 people to write letters. And so in the discussions of the Transportation Improvement Plan at CAMPO, no equity issues were discussed, no walking and biking and safety were discussed. What was discussed is that we got a bunch of letters about this one intersection, and they added it to the tip. And so it's a very important question about what is the public and who shows up. And a key there is, what does the MPO do to try to talk to the public? So this is the tip outreach plan. It's really nice. They spread out all over the region to try to reach everybody. More people live here than the rest of the place. And so there were 3 meetings here, and there were 10 in the rest of the place. And so right now, CAMPO is doing the active transportation plan. Right today, there's a meeting about the one Austin meeting is right now, and I'm very sorry, you should have been there. There's 2 Austin meetings. They're doing one at the School for the Blind right now. But they're doing 2 meetings in Austin, and the rest are spread out across the region, which they should spread out across the region, but they are very deliberately not providing access to a lot of people here. So one more Hidalgo County video is this is what Hidalgo County thinks about participation.
Leave your mark. Make a difference and have your voice be heard. The Hidalgo County MPO Transportation Policy Committee meets every third Thursday of the month in Weslaco. For more info, visit hcmpos.org.
So, if you do not go to the Hidalgo County MPO meetings, they will build a freeway on your house. So I think this is the last of the basics. Circular logic and forecasts are the most important thing. So when you do a regional transportation plan, you have to say, officially, where do you think people are going to live and work in the future? And there's a technical advisory committee that's supposed to provide sort of unbiased technical support. And then in Austin, then the Transportation Policy Board overrules that committee. And so it's very important that everyone should understand that in general, Texas MPOs, the regional forecasts are biased towards sprawl and road building. In Austin, it's much worse. And so the Texas demographer publishes county by county how many people they think will live in the county, long range. And the key is they have a sort of short range set of projections and a long range. And the short range is just supposed to kind of capture what's happening right now, but they advise you not to use it for long range planning. And then the long range is what they really think in their models is how many people live in your county. CAMPO decided to use the short range. And so what that means is that Hays County, in our official regional forecast, instead of growing to 350,000 people, which is what the state demographer recommends you think, the forecasts say that it will grow to 650,000 people. And so what this means is that Hays County can then argue for more money for Hays County. Hays County can say things to the public like traffic is going to double and we will have to build a freeway on your house. And but it's not true. And in general, the CAMPO forecasts do this. Hays and Williamson County are the kind of remarkable. The vision they have for our future is remarkable. That Williamson County will grow from 400,000 people to 1.4 million people. And do they mean in the current car-dependent neighborhood form? And do they really want 1.4 million people spread across the entirety of Williamson County? Do they mean they're going to build cities? What does it mean? It's remarkable that this is our official regional forecast. And I'll explain, one of the recommendations, there are other ways of doing it. And the ideal way is to actually look at scenarios and say, we probably will add 2 million people to the region if we build this set of projects, and if we have these kind of housing policies, they will live like this, and here are the costs. And if we do this set of projects and these kind of housing policies, they will all live there, and we have these kind of costs. We haven't done that. And so this is the key area for reform, is to not have such misleading regional forecasts. A key there is that the regional forecasts usually say, I don't know about the Austin ones. In Houston, I spent a lot of time in Houston fighting with the MPO. And the regional forecasts always say, if current trends and policies continue. Current trends and policies include our current plan to build roads everywhere. And so when you develop the 2030 RTP, you use the 2025 RTP set of projects. And so in Houston, that meant the Grand Parkway, the longest loop toll road in the world, 180 miles, has been on the plan for the last 2 decades. And so every time the Houston Galveston Area Council has done a model to allocate out where they think people will live across the region, they have included the subsidy of sprawl, which is the Grand Parkway, and the induced development. And so the forecast maps include about 1 million people choosing to live along the Grand Parkway that would not have otherwise done it if you hadn't built that freeway. And then You say, here's our official forecast. And then you say, but if we don't, with this forecast, if we don't build these freeways, look at the traffic models. It's insane. We have to build the freeway. And that is the story of Texas. That is the predominant story of car socialism and wealth transfer in Texas, is that math. And when TTI worked with TxDOT to develop the lobbying package for Prop 1 and Prop 7 that said we are deficient $50 billion in transportation spending. If we don't do it, traffic will double. They were relying upon these forecasts to make that case. And these forecasts assumed they would spend that money and assumed all of the perversion of the housing market that spending that money would do. So that's a problem. And so here's just some things in the Houston region that the CAMPO forecasts pervert. So Project Connect 1.0 that failed had to use the CAMPO forecast models to decide how we would build our transit. The current Project Connect 2.0, when they are right now trying to decide between different lines that we might try to push forward, they are using the forecast models that assume Williamson County will add 1 million people. And so that will show that we probably need to invest our transit to be a long commuter rail line to Williamson County. All the I-35 deliberations, TxDOT telling you that they're going to reduce congestion of I-35, depends upon that. All these other things. The Grove, the whole debate over the Grove. When the city of Austin requires somebody to do a traffic impact analysis for a building, the engineers are using the CAMPO forecast to try to understand the traffic models. Aha. So, transparency, I'm going to skip this. The tips are published as giant Excel files as PDFs, which is insane. And the question is whether Texas MPOs violate Title VI. HUD found that Texas housing authorities did, and the key question was, it wasn't intentional. The actual effect of the policies was found to be disproportionately burdensome on people of color. And so our MPO policies also, even if no one's intending them to be. So one point is CAMPO on their website has a mistake on their Title VI page, which if you were going to file your Title VI complaint, it's sort of interesting. Do they care? So here's my report. Very quickly, I've crowdfunded this research over the last 6 months to look at MPOs in Texas. I sort of rushed to get the report, the current version, done for the Sundec Commission to look at TxDOT. And so I actually went through and looked at the actual people who actually are serving on these boards. And the 9 largest MPOs in Texas, and I actually looked them up online and said, I'm pretty sure that's a white guy. Sometimes it involved looking for people's Facebook. And so you end up with this. These are the people of Austin in terms of their race and ethnicity. And this is the Technical Advisory Council, and this is the Transportation Policy Board, as of last summer when I did this report. And that's the problem. And over the summer, CAMPO debated changing the TAC, and the whole plan was to further disenfranchise the people of Travis County. And so those are all these different proposals. So there's a geographic element of this, and the proposal to disenfranchise the people of Travis County went through. So I think the number is like 34. So that if you're a person on Travis County, you're sort of represented 34% as much as the other people of the region on the TAC. However, I did a report over the summer just on CAMPO. I failed to block that thing, but it did start, at least Travis County representatives started looking at it. And so, for the first time in about 2 or 3 years, there will be an African American on the CAMPO board when they meet in 2 weeks, because the Travis County Commissioner's Court decided not to do what they've always done, which is to keep the same mayor of a small town as one of their reps, who is probably a wonderful person, but happens to also be another white man. And they instead decided to send the new commissioner, Trevelyan, to be in that spot. So Travis County has not, CAMPO has not had a single African American person on the TPB or TAC for several years. So the core of my report is all this junk. And maybe you shouldn't look at this at decidetexas.org. You can get the report. I was explaining that the whole point is to have this data by MPO and by county and to give it to you. It's all set up in a way that you could do statistics, you can do econometrics on this data and play with it. But it's kind of there's a bunch of amazing stuff. The key is this. So this is the people of Dallas, and then this is the people on their policy board. So 14% women in Dallas, which I don't know if you guys know, 50% of people are women. And have this for each region. I did split it up. I'll show you that later. But so this is the picture, that if you are white, you're overrepresented that much on the Houston Galveston Area Council, Transportation Policy Council. If you are black, you are underrepresented that much, and so on. And if anybody cares, sort of my formula is very simple. It's just sort of percent of the board that are your race divided by the percent of the population you're supposed to represent that are your race, kind of thing. So I developed 3 indices. There's a male advantage index, which Houston is the worst, but followed closely by Dallas, Corpus Christi, and Killeen. Austin is it's close to Brownsville on being the best here. So the best we can do in Texas is 30% of the Transportation Policy Council are women in Austin. And then a white advantage index, with Corpus Christi and Houston being sort of remarkably worse than everywhere else. Brownsville's funny because Brownsville's 91% Hispanic, and then their board is 88%, but that difference is enough to make it seem like it's a radical white advantage. So it's sort of, once again, Austin is, not bad, only 50% overrepresented, which is bad. Just not as bad as Houston. And then a geographic advantage. And so this only is in terms of county. So that took the urban core and compared it to the other counties. So if you were in City of Austin rep, you counted as Travis. And Austin is actually not that bad in this score, but Houston and Corpus are remarkably bad. So there's this whole chart. I made a composite index. And then this is sort of really to show how bad it is. The bigger the circle, and the farther that way and that way, the worse you are, essentially. There's a whole key of this is that where this says people, that's just actually the people of the region. Senate is basically if you treat each county as one thing. And so if there are the race, ethnic makeup of the county is treated, if each county gets one vote, then basically a suburban white county would sort of have more advantage for the white people in that county. And that is how our MPOs are structured, that all the suburban and rural counties have more votes per person. And so that actually contributes to the racial and ethnic disparity. The actual joint powers agreements that set up our MPOs actually structurally are making them more white. But then the actual result of how much unbalanced is way more than both of those things. So help me with that. The big question is, can we prove there's a violation of Title VI? Can we break the entire Texas transportation system? That would be problematic for lots of reasons, but we need reform. And there are other things you could look at and use these indices. Your local governments. Austin has a huge female advantage index, 8 female council members to 4 males. Neighborhood groups like the ANC would be interesting to look at, and all these kind of things. People with disabilities are pretty much not there. I had a rare neurological disorder called Guillain-Barré syndrome. So I went from walking to completely paralyzed or sort of paraplegic in like 3 days, and then was in the hospital for 2 months, and then in a wheelchair for a month, and then in a cane. And I'd been a complete streets activist for a long time, but you don't understand. And I didn't understand what it meant. And in the ethical failing of our society, that you can't get around, and you do not have access to the city in our society. And so the fact that 22% of the people of Texas are people with disabilities, as far as I could tell, there's one of the 203 MPO people. And so that's problematic, and it's specifically in decision-making cases, if you do not understand the various needs of people with disabilities, is a real problem. And one thing is our population with disabilities is going to grow very significantly. It will be people with mental disabilities, as we have the aging boomers, meaning they shouldn't drive, and we should have other ways of getting around the city. And then in general, people who want to live in walkable urban places are not represented, and that's actually Sam sent me this. There's a study that there's a systematic bias not having people representing cities on MPOs reduces the amount spent on transit, and that's sort of the whole point of this report. And so, like, this is Houston. You know, this is the people of Harris County, whereas that's the votes of Harris County. And then I left the default image, but all of these other disciplines aren't there. And so, you know, we are planning out road building and transit building are the most significant public health thing we do regionally, and there are not health people at the table. There are in general not urban planning people, especially at CAMPO. Public safety, there's not Vision Zero. All these things. I guess I will skip all this stuff. I have a lot of, in the course of this, I found tons of data, and maybe the point to tell you is that there's a ton of data that nobody's really looked at. The most important being TxDOT DISCOS data, DISCOS. And they have every year data on vehicle miles traveled, how much they spent, how many lane miles, for every county in Texas. And it's not published in an easy form, so I made them give me 10 years of it, and I have it in Excel. I will give it to you. It's on a post on Street Blog now. But you can find things that, like, VMT varies greatly across Texas. And that traffic deaths are caused by VMT, which is horrible that TxDOT and TTI don't look at this and understand it. And also that Texans are driving significantly less. The Houston region on TxDOT roads drives less today in total than it did 10 years ago. Not per person, total. However, you were convinced to constitutionally require road spending 2 years ago because traffic's going to double. Whereas our two most developed urban regions are driving less now than they were. And so this is a very different picture of Texas and what our future holds. I believe 2014 will prove to be the peak of total vehicle miles traveled for Texas, unless we spend enough money to expand all the roads. Houston is essentially given, TxDOT has transferred $5 billion worth of wealth from the Houston region to rural roads in the last 10 years. Blah, blah, blah. So, the end is, what should we do? I'm working to talk to the legislature. One idea is just to require all MPO policy boards to at least include one person who can somewhat competently represent people with disabilities. Require all MPOs to look at this stuff and to try to assess, are people of color, are women, are people with disabilities participating in our public outreach? Are we a systematic racism? A key one is the MPOs could be in the sunset process, and they are not. And then a whole nother talk is that a federal rule was passed a month ago that, if it stands, will require San Antonio and Austin to be treated essentially as one metro area in 2022 for transportation planning purposes. If the rule stands, either CAMPO and MPO have to do their TIP and their RTP together, which is a bureaucratic nightmare, or we need a new MPO. And I am a strong advocate now that we should combine all of these entities into one new MPO. And then Texas will have Houston and Dallas, which are each 25% of our state, and the Central Corridor will be about 10% of our state. And part of my dream is setting up a new MPO means we could do it right and fairly and to represent all the people throughout the region. CAMPO recommendations. I believe we need a new committee. We have a technical advisory committee. We need a policy advisory committee that can have all those other people, the health people, the business interests, the equity interests. We need a regional safety council. Houston has a regional safety council. Dallas does. Austin does not. We could call it the Regional Vision Zero Task Force if you want. NRDC would love to come help us do regional forecasts and do scenario building that is more realistic and allows for a more thoughtful transportation plan. Transparency, essentially, all PDFs of Excel should be outlawed. And if you are publishing data, it has to be published as Excel, damn it. The Joint Powers Agreement of CAMPO requires it, or suggests maybe, that the member governments send people representing the diversity of their member governments. I think 4 of the counties have never sent anyone other than a white person. So there is possibly a legal question of if the CAMPO chair has stayed the same person for the last, I think, almost 8 years. And that's not good. There used to be a system of rotating the chair around. And then the Capital Metro Board is a whole other topic. CAMPO gets to appoint 3 members of the Capital Metro Board. A lot of the CAMPO region does not actually pay into the Capital Metro tax or is not part of the service area. So why does CAMPO control the Capital Metro Board? And as far as I can tell, this is the only case across the country where an MPO controls a transit agency. So then the key is you need to start going to CAMPO meetings. The next meeting is on campus, February 13th. And we need to think about what our future holds. Finally, I write for Streets Blog. Check it out. This is where you can find out what's happening in transportation policy during the session. Vision Zero Texas is something we're launching. And then all of this stuff is at decidetexas.org. And you can download the current version of the report, which is this one. And soon I hope to be posting Excels and hope you all will play with them and find out all kinds of things I didn't find out. So thank you very much.
Thank you. That was obviously there's a lot to reform.
Yeah.
Let's open it up for questions for Jay. There are a lot of sort of aspects to his presentation and thought process. So.
Yeah, I have a ton of questions.
Okay.
So I'll just start with one. Can you just explain a little bit more about the constitutional requirement for spending on automobiles versus?
Prop 7 was put to the voters a year and a half ago, and it actually added to the Texas Constitution that $2.5 billion of sales tax must be spent on roads every year, but then depending on taxes, another $2.5 billion pretty much also must be spent on roads. And that it included a bunch of things that say it can't be spent on tolling, which is the only free market way to reduce congestion, and it can't be spent on transit. There are good people at TxDOT right now trying to figure out ways to legally spend it on HOT lanes that happen to benefit transit. But we are stuck for the next 10 years constitutionally. The legislature has no choice unless we overrule that, unless we have another constitutional vote, to essentially spend $5 billion a year on roads. So actually all the governor, House, and Senate published their budgets, and all 3 of them proudly proclaim that we are providing $5 billion worth of transportation funding, which they are required to do by. So the legislature this year will not talk about any road funding, most likely, or any transportation funding at all, because they already did it. It's done for the next 10 years. There's the conspiracy theory version is that it's reasonable to think that Texas over the next 10 years will be controlled by diverse urban lefties. And this guarantees the gravy train through that terrible time. So.
Other questions? Yes.
So somebody comments Prop 1 where those that were more concerned with affordable housing, and I like that you brought up that there's obviously connection between
Yeah.
focus on one, or maybe together and vice versa. What do you see potential partnerships to create that dialogue in which, since
Right.
we now have Prop 1 and we're going to be rolling out
Right.
transportation planning, we should engage more of that local housing.
Right.
What is the most about that?
Yeah, and so a huge thing is just better information. And there's really terrible information being flung across Austin on affordability and a lot of incorrect assessments of data. And so that's you guys' job, is to look at what has gentrification meant for Austin. Currently in the east side, and I haven't done this because I haven't gotten my hands, I don't have my GS computers in Houston. How many low-income people live in the east side of Austin today versus 2000? And I've seen no one try to present that information. Whereas if you show percent change and various things that aren't really good data, you get a different story. So we need a lot better story, a lot better data, and a lot better stories, because the bad stories divide us and lead us down wrong bad paths. But two, we need to have people working for affordable housing, working with people working for transportation. Austin Habitat for Humanity is very progressive in terms of that stuff. They don't build single-family homes anymore, which is great, and it was very beneficial to low-income people that they're doing that. And so we need more of that, I think. And Code Next, of course, will decide pretty much the framework for that.
Sam?
So my understanding of Title VI, or the difference between the application of Title VI to transportation issues versus housing issues, is that the federal statute bars, I guess, discriminatory impacts, disparate impacts, whereas you don't have the kind of corollary for transportation or at a statutory level. Is there anything in like federal regulations that prohibit disparate impacts, or is it or is it just a matter of intent?
My impression is that we haven't had the data to prove it. And I've read a bunch of US dot things about MPOs, and they're debating the whole thing about changing CAMPO and AMPO happen to be one thing or not. US dot thinks, no, it's terrible that all you MPOs are racist, but we can't prove it yet. And it's sort of the governor's prerogative on how to set up MPOs. And even in that Nelson paper, the paper notes that we don't have the data to really consider this. And so I think it's great about environmental justice movement and what the changes that went in to require MPOs to consider things, but I think the process is sort of a sham. We really need to be looking at things differently. How many dollars are being spent on this side of I-35 and on that side? That doesn't appear anywhere in the environmental justice analysis, and just the simple fact of spending money on transit versus roads, and whether or not that impacts people of color differently. So my impression is really that the case law is not there because people haven't had the data, and we are at the point where we do have the data, we just need to bother to actually do it. And so I don't know. It's possible that the stuff I've gathered really might present a real challenge, and no one's bothered to do it before. And I could be wrong, and I'm not a lawyer.
So, yes.
You mentioned Code Next and you have some concerns about it. Can you just elaborate on that subject a little bit?
Yeah, so that's the big one, but in general, Code Next was going to be awesome. And in general, zoning is dumb, and we should not have land use zoning. It is a tool for segregation and climate change, and we should stop doing that. But you need to replace it with something else. And so there's a movement across the nation and the world to move towards form-based code, which tries to respect blah, blah, blah. So that's what this is supposed to be. The process has been perverted by various people. And so it really remains to be seen. The decisions will be made over the next 10 months. But the draft code is 1,100 pages. So it's kind of very difficult for the public to really be involved. So it's going to require, you're going to have groups on all, you're going to have segregationists that are going to be analyzing it and putting out their version of the story, and you're going to have
urbanists putting out their version, and then you're going to have affordable housing people putting out their version. But when it comes down to it, our region is adding somewhere between 1 and 3 million people. And if we build housing for them in the city of Austin, we will reduce traffic, climate change, we will be more equitable, everything will be better. If we are scared about having those people or just having anyone added to our neighborhood, and if we force that fear to not allow housing in the city of Austin, we will have much more traffic, we will have nightmares of spending, and our budgets will spiral out of control. So it's really complicated, and I don't know. But ideally, what you would want Code Next to do is to allow the market to meet the massive unmet demand for walkable urbanism, to allow our neighborhoods to become complete neighborhoods. And I live in Brentwood, which is kind of sprawly, but kind of accessible, walkable, but it's not at all a complete neighborhood, and it needs a lot more stuff to be a sort of good human habitat. And so the idea that things should not change from the day I moved in is a dramatic and weird philosophy that has amazing costs.
So I'm gonna
Yeah.
ask a question. So many people would say that MPOs don't really matter, that they're kind of worthless. And if you look at the real agents behind the transportation decisions, it's the member agencies, particularly the state DOTs, that really are, the budget items that are coming through the TIP,
Right.
Which is, I think, the 80 billion, worth of investment that you're looking at. That's largely driven by the state DOTs, with obviously some matching money coming in from some local sources. But state DOTs do not go to the MPO board and have their capital program kind of approved and sort of reviewed line item by line item. And so many would say the problem is really with the state DOTs and having the decision-making authority within the state DOTs over so much of the federal and state resources. And so I wonder if that's something that you've thought about. There was a model in California through state legislation that actually took 3/4 of what was conventionally the state DOT budget and suballocated that to county level, quote unquote, regional organizations. Right. They're still county, so they're in multi-county areas. It's not truly regional. But it is moving away from a state-centric model and producing, I think, a different set of decisions. Mm-hmm. So how do how would you, there are many people who don't pay attention to MPOs because they feel they're just stapling together what everyone else wants.
Right. Well, so one thing would be that's what they want you to think, and that's a good way to keep people not involved in the process. But another angle is that basically your characterization I think is mostly true in some ways, but TxDOT cannot spend money on a regional significant project if it is not in the regional transportation plan and in the TIP. And TxDOT's public process is required by federal law to be based on CAMPO's forecast models. So, and TxDOT leadership is saying we can't build our way out of this congestion. It's really unfortunate the legislature requires all of our money to be spent on just building roads. So I think we're in a state where the administration of TxDOT would like things to be a little more complicated and effective. They would like to collaborate more with MPOs on good metrics and things. So there is a case for massive decisions happen in MPOs. And in Houston, it's every year the MPO Transportation Policy Council has about $800 million that can be spent on anything. It could be spent on rail transit if they wanted. In Austin, it's a much smaller number, but it's like $100 million that's just completely discretionary. And so in the whole UTP, there's a metropolitan matching money that is completely discretionary at the TPC level. And generally, they happen to spend it on roads too. So it's complex, and I think it's clear that in a region of 2 million people, we could have 30 more people paying attention to the MPO.
I wonder, the examples are cases where an MPO board has actually voted to reject a tip or an RTP are minimal. I mean,
Right.
I can't really think of very many, and they've been extreme cases driven by one controversial project that somehow got in, and
I mean, which is the argument that maybe the way progress happens in America is lawsuits, and so if you can break a tip, if you can, most likely if somebody had the time, you could break Houston's tip based on air quality conformity. Some people that know what they're talking about know that would be very difficult, and it would be very destructive to the region to break the tip. It would mean all federal funding would stop immediately. So you would hope if you had such a lawsuit that it would settle before you broke it. But it could be that that's required. The fact of the matter is that if you rejected an RTP or a tip, that your transit agency would stop getting federal money the next day. So you can't. So it has to be a process that we have to. I really think this is one of those cases like third-party activists wanting to, we need everyone at the table, and we don't have people at the table. And it's to some extent not the MPO's fault. They clearly could redesign their public outreach process and make it more accessible, and they are trying. But the problem is the people, and the people of the Austin region are not engaged. And even TxDOT might be. I mean, with the I-35 example, it seems clear to me that the powers that be want to go ahead and do the sink and cap version, and maybe even push it towards Reconnect Austin, but that it can't be seen as coming from up on high. And they are very disappointed in the people of Austin for not submitting comments during the process that happened 4 months ago. And it's the people didn't show up for the most significant project in our region. Nobody really cared. And so that's clearly a rebuke of TxDOT's outreach efforts. But I personally believe that we should be proselytizing that everyone should be involved at all levels. And it should go to TxDOT, and we should go to every single. The Texas Transportation Commission meets in town. You can go to their meetings. You can talk. You can ask them to do whatever, And we're a very complex state, and so we need a complex citizen involvement in all these processes. But finally, in general, having more discretion at the MPO level would almost certainly be better. And there's a push to do in the Obama administration to do that, and they created Tiger and other things, so they failed at the big push.
Any final questions? We're over.
Yeah.
Maybe if there's one last question. Okay.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And go to decidetexas.org. Check all that.